Ladies and gentlemen, this is Nate Crespo, your host today and forever. Check us out, lawyersinthemaking.substack.com. But welcome back to another episode of the Lawyers in the Making podcast, where it is my job to focus on unique journeys to the law and law school of professionals in the legal field and law students. But today, let's talk about what we're doing today. Today we have another amazing guest. He's a Indiana University Robert H. McKinney School of Law graduate and currently works as a partner at Lewis Kappes. He has held past positions as an adjunct professor at Indiana University School of Law and as a law clerk at Klein and Farrell. Oh, Klein, Farrell, Christie Lee, there's more than that. Excited to have him on the podcast today. Mr. Scott Oliver, welcome to the podcast. How are we doing today?
Hey, Nate, thank you so much. Doing really, really well. Like I said, it's kind of raining outside, so I put the blinds down, but ready to get into some topics with you.
Well, I am absolutely ecstatic to have you here today, Scott. But before we get started, Scott, can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so you want the boring part or the personal part?
You could do both.
A little bit of both. Well, you already said I'm a partner at Lewis Kappes. We're an Indianapolis-based law firm. I'm one of the co-chairs of our SBA Legal Department, so Small Business Association loans. We represent banks and non-bank lenders in all 50 states to close mainly acquisitions. So my bread and butter is business acquisitions for America's entrepreneurs, but we also work in real estate acquisitions, refinances, working capital lines, anything that you can imagine that essentially funds all of these small businesses throughout the country to, I know it sounds cheesy, but quote unquote, accomplish whatever goal it is to achieve their dreams. So I'm here. I'm one of the people in our group. We're about 15 to 16 full-time SBA closing attorneys and paraprofessionals. But outside of that, we're a full-service law firm. But we're a firm within a firm here, and we love what we do, love our clients, and love coming to work every day.
Well, I'd like to say the latter part of that, you love what you do every day. That's a wonderful thing. Probably the greatest thing in the world, I'd have to say. And it's a very important thing for people to hear, because when people go out there, they try to find their jobs. Find something that you love. Find something that you love to do. Wakes you up in the morning, gets you out of bed. So you're not staring at the alarm clock being like, not again. I have to go to work again. But let's go back to the wonderful year of 2013. I usually tell people how old I am. I'm done doing that. It is over. I keep offending people by accident, and I don't mean to do it. But you were at Purdue University. You graduated with a majoring in corporate communication, and then that next following year, you ended up at the Indiana University School of Law. So, Scott, simply put, why'd you do it? Why'd you go to law school?
Oh, that's a long, long story that I'll try to condense, but I always tell people the reason I went to law school is I was trying to impress this really attractive young girl, and her name was Stacey Oliver. It wasn't Stacey Oliver at the time. She's my wife now, but in high school, she actually wanted to be an attorney. I didn't have any aspirations of being a lawyer, as a 16-year-old or so. So I told her, hey, I want to be a lawyer too. I want to figure out what that's all about. I'll do the research with you. I'll take all of the business classes. I'll figure this out, essentially just because I wanted to be next to her to learn more about what she's about. So in the process of doing that, I figured out, hey, this is actually something I could really get behind. It plays to my strengths. I actually love certain areas of law, and in my world, it was kind of the corporate, more business side of things, but I like to talk. I like to speak. I like to write. I like to research. I love to read. All of these things kind of coupled together. And I said, well, maybe I need to keep going down this path. So about a year into that, her and I started dating, and I started being serious about it. I said, no, I really want to go to law school. This isn't a thing anymore, right? So we kept going down that same route with the same dreams, aspirations, and whatnot, and said, look, we're going to apply to various schools, see where we get in, make the decision. We both ended up going to Purdue with the thought that we wanted to go to law school. So that entire time in undergraduate, I was taking the classes, I was joining the groups, I was doing all of the things, shadowing people that was going to lead me to law school as much as possible, right? Because you can major in anything. So I did that very, very intentionally, knowing that that was my path. And by the time that I took the LSAT, by the time that I applied to a bunch of different schools, once I got those acceptances, it was easy for me to say, okay, now what makes the next logical step in terms of where to go to practice law? And for me, it was IU in Indianapolis because I wanted to practice law in Indianapolis. Indianapolis. And that's where I'm at. That's where all of the heavy hitters in Indianapolis came. Not all of them. I don't want to offend anybody there, right? Most of the heavy hitters in Indianapolis went to IU McKinney, many to Bloomington, others throughout the nation as well. But it's a real small legal community with a lot of people who know one another, their practices, families, and whatnot.
Yeah, first I have to say that's a beautiful love story. It could really be some sort of novel. You can make that a novel for sure. I'd read that book. But I think something else you said, which was really important, is that you knew your strengths, you identified your strengths, and you used them to your advantage. You love reading, you love writing, and you love speaking, which I like speaking as well. I made a whole podcast so I could just speak on here the whole time. The one reason why I started the podcast, because I get told I speak too much. So if I come on here, I can get all my speaking out now so people don't have to hear me speaking when I'm out there in the world. But let's talk about the first year of law school. 2013, you get in there, you're bright, you're young, you're ready to go. How was that first year? People say they hate it, people say they love it. How was it for you?
I'm going to be one of those annoying people that say that I loved it. All right. And I don't say that just to blow smoke or to tell people to go to law school, but to me, the exams weren't fun, right? Nobody likes the stress of an exam and the unknown, especially your first semester when you go into it and you say, what the heck am I doing, right? That part wasn't fun. But going to law school, meeting all of the new people, figuring out, oh, you want to do this, you want to do this, oh, you went to this school, you're from this part of the country or outside of the country, or what are your goals and aspirations? That part was really, really fun to me. So it's the relationships, it's the friendships, and, the law schools have fun outings for law students as well. You just have to manage your time right. But to me, that was just a pressure cooker of future leaders, a pressure cooker for future people that will be friends, colleagues. Some of them are clients, right? All of those things really attracted me, I guess, to being in law school. That and just you're taking that next big leap. And that's fun to me.
Yeah, I think it's great to hear first that you loved it. So I have someone else to reference back to when I tell people that, oh, I've been told people love it. Because some people, I say that and they're like, what are you talking about? What do you mean? But I have to ask from that, how important was I guess within law school, how integral was making those network connections with your other students and other classmates, as well as the professors, as well as the people you work with? I guess all I'm asking is, how integral has networking been for your career and the rest of what you do now?
You could end this podcast right now by me just saying relationships are everything. If you read any of my content online or you see other podcast interviews, I will say that time and time again, because those relationships matter. And you kind of encompassed all of them. It's not just the people who are sitting next to you in law school. Those people are critical for a variety of reasons, both personal and professional. But also, how are you interacting with your professors when you do poorly or when you do great? How are you interacting with them outside of the classroom? But another one of the real critical ones is, how are you interacting with the lawyers in the community? So for me, it was kind of my personal goal, like it is for you doing this podcast, is I wanted to meet with at least one attorney every single week of law school. And I did that intentionally. Even when I didn't have time, even if it was to the detriment of something else, I sat down and had coffee with somebody. They didn't do Zoom. Make it sound like I'm old. I'm not that old, but they didn't really have Zoom back then. So I was going out into my backyard, into the city in Indianapolis and saying, hey, let's go get lunch. Let's go grab coffee. Those relationships, whether it's the students, the community members, or the attorneys, those have turned into things that I could have never imagined. Some friendships, some professionals, some referrals, some clients, all of that, you don't see it at the time, but if you're taking a long view of things, that's going to pay off time and time and time over in the future of your career.
So in building those relationships and building that network, what are some skills that you recommend to people that they sort of up or enhance in any way to ensure that they're building relationships in the right way and having those sort of soft skills in order to build that sort of network?
Sounds super corny, but just be yourself. And going into those types of meetings without the expectation of something is really, really important. So, I said it's a goal for me to meet an attorney every single week, but it wasn't my goal to meet that attorney and say, hey, by the way, can you get me a job? It wasn't my goal to say, hey, can I have a form purchase agreement so that I can use it for a class? Or do you have an outline? It wasn't anything like that. It was just, I really want to sit down with you, get to know you. And hey, maybe this is just going to be a great single time meeting, but most of the time I wanted to connect with them outside of that meeting too, hopefully in person time and time again in the future, or at the very least connect with them online, learn about their practices, figure out what they're all about, and not just treat it as something transactional. The moment you do that, it comes off as inauthentic. It's kind of awkward. It's weird. And there's really no benefit from just collecting business cards.
That's an absolute truism there, and something that I very much follow within my own life. It seems like you were having your own podcast episodes every single week, meeting with people with coffee and getting to know them very well. But I think the authenticity that you bring up is very, very important, really in any facet of any part of anyone's life, in making sure that you're being your authentic self, you're being honest, you're being raw. I think that's such an important thing that I've learned, is to be much more honest with people, be an open book, just like you were telling me before we started recording the podcast. That's something so important to have, and something to present to people, because you come off better, you come off more likable, and it's all part of the sort. I don't want to call it a game, but the game you got to play. You got to be able to do it at the highest level, and it seems like you, Scott, you are doing it at the highest level. But let's talk about your law clerkship, which you did in the middle of law school at Klein, Farrell, Christie, and Lee. Can you talk about that experience? How was it? Did you like it? Did you love it?
Oh yeah, I actually did love it, for a lot of different reasons. So the firm itself is now under a different name, but they're some of the best litigators, I would argue, in the country. They're phenomenal people. They're down to earth, and they taught me some of the most valuable skills that I've ever been taught. But that same position was what taught me I didn't want to be a litigator. Okay. I enjoyed it, and I thought that was the way I was going to go in law school because of all the things we talked before. I like to speak. I like people. I like, thought I would like being in a courtroom, like you see on TV, those sort of things. I found out after doing litigation that just wasn't for me. It didn't, quote unquote, fill my cup, so to speak. I liked some parts of it, but other parts, I just couldn't see myself doing it in 5 years. So I had a conversation with them at the end of that clerkship and said, hey, I love you guys. Great family atmosphere here. You guys are phenomenal attorneys. But I think I'm going to do OCI, on-campus interviewing, and try to get a summer associate position with a firm that's larger, that does more things, and has a group that's focused in what, I said I do and I love now, which is corporate law, lending and finance, working with entrepreneurs. And they, supportively said, of course, do that. Keep working, do good work for us. Go on your journey, figure that out, and then keep us in mind for the future. I now refer students there all the time and say, hey, these people will mentor you. Apply for this job. So I love them. They love me, I think, and it's a good relationship still.
As I always say, what you put out into the universe, you usually get back in some way, shape, or form. And you certainly exemplified that in reaching out to people, getting to know people, going to these jobs. But I think another aspect that is really important that you bring up is finding out what you don't want to do as opposed to what you do want to do. And usually it gets swept under the rug because everyone's thinking, oh, what do I want to do? And being able to have those sort of experiences, either not exactly negative experience, but experience where, hey, this isn't for me, and have a different experience and say, wow, I really love this. I really want to continue doing this. I'm really passionate about it. And what I have to ask from that is, how did you figure out the entrepreneurial ship and sort of supporting small businesses? How did you figure out that was the path you wanted to take?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, when I was finishing up that clerkship during law school and I was applying for on-campus interviews, there's a bunch of different firms that would come into town. There'd be a resume drop, all of those things that most of your listeners, law students, probably know about. So I went through those. I applied to all the ones that I thought were interesting, but the biggest thing that I was looking for was a firm that had multiple very, very strong practice areas with attorneys that I could see as mentors. So I landed on several that were of interest to me, but ultimately had the interview with the firm that I'm at now, Lewis Kappes. And as soon as I met with a couple of the attorneys there who I viewed as mentors, I was like, that's it. That's where I want to go. Mainly, not necessarily because of the areas of law, but because I saw leaders within that firm that I said, I want to be like them. I want to learn from them. So I took that job knowing I was going to be exposed to a lot of things, but that I had at least these mentors there who could show me how to be a good attorney, right? And when I got into the position, our firm, I won't go into too much detail, but a summer associate rotates throughout our departments. They're very focused department groups that are really strong in certain practice areas. So I did that, and I went into the various practice areas, but then landed in our lending and finance department, which is, ironically enough, where the mentors were that I identified. And they said, hey, there's this thing called SBA lending. Have you heard of it? And I was like, well, yeah, but not really. And they said, okay, well, here's 400 files we go through that we closed. Look at this checklist, look at all of these documents, and tell me what you think. And I was like, oh, crap. I just signed up for something that was going to be really difficult and time consuming that I might not be interested in. But it turned out that I absolutely loved it because I was reading about deal structures. I was figuring out that our clients, the banks and the lenders, all of these files that I'm going through told a story of every single business. So it was like every time I cracked open a file, maybe I wasn't working on the file yet. I wasn't an attorney, but I was learning about what this entrepreneur wanted to do, what their business background was, and what their future projections and I guess goals and dreams were going to be. And going through those files taught me what we look for. So I won't go into too deep dive of our practice areas unless you want to talk about that, but I'm looking at contracts, I'm looking at leases, landlord waivers, title commitments, all of these different things. And at the time, not being incredibly familiar with it, but with the repetition every single time, seeing them over and over again, I was now interested in what that practice group did, but I was also learning. So I went to the mentors and I said, this is actually fantastic. I want to work with you guys. And as soon as you let your interest be known at our firm, they pour into you. They say, if you want to do that here, we're going to mold you into the best that you can be. So I started working with those attorneys on active files. So it was no longer these closed, stories, which I actually enjoyed reading about and learning about. It was active deals where our big name clients were financing all of these entrepreneurs throughout the country. And it starts small. You do little tasks, research, all the things that a clerk does, but very, very quickly, they let me kind of get my feet wet, jump in and figure out how do you become a closing attorney? How do you work with these clients and get a deal done? And after that, I was hooked because you figured out that transactional law, your listeners might think that it's just paper pushing. And I joke a lot about that online saying, I'm a paper pusher and all that, but there's probably more communication, negotiation, relationship building. So we'll take it back to relationship building in SBA lending closing processes than you would ever get as a litigator who may go to court once or twice a year.
Yeah, something I really like to key in on a lot of the times on this podcast is sort of the human aspect of the legal field and the fact that you go through law school. I haven't been there yet, but you go through law school from what I've learned. And you learn about the law, you learn how to write motions, and you learn how to write summary judgments, and you learn how to read and dissect. But at the end of the day, when you go out there in the real world, it's all people stuff. You're always dealing with people, either that be clients, either that be other firms, either that be judges. Can you sort of describe the sort of human aspect of the legal field that you go through in your own experience and what you do today with SBA loans and entrepreneurs?
Yeah, certainly. From the law firm's perspective, just working in a private law firm, if you have listeners that are interested in that, there's people skills that go into that incredibly deep because you're working with a team, you're working with people who come in, who go out, all of those things. So that one's pretty obvious. But on the SBA side, from what I do, when we get a deal that comes in the door, we're normally engaged as soon as a commitment letter is signed. So as soon as some entrepreneur out there says, I need money to buy this business. Will you do this for me, bank? And the bank says, yes, I'm committing to give you a loan. That's when we get involved and we get that documentation that says, all right, here's what we're giving them. Here are the terms. Here's the history of the business, and have at it. At that point, we internally will do a bunch of processes and systems to sketch out that deal and to figure out how to quarterback the closing. So we'll be working with the closer directly, who of course is a human, right? We'll be working with the borrower, of course, who is a human. We'll be working with the borrower's attorney, the seller's attorney, the title company, the escrow company, the broker, all of these different parties to take this thing from A to Z. A being, when the commitment letter is issued, Z being when the money goes out the door and everybody says, yay, hooray, we're done. That whole entire process in between, right? All about communication and all about relationships. How do you get to the closing table? Well, here's how you do it. What do we need from you, the attorneys, everybody else? Here's what we need. Here's how we do it. Of course, in between, there's review, lots of review. There's note taking, there's processes and all of the legal work that goes into it. But at every step of the way, I'm speaking with somebody who, is in a position in their lives where this is really critical for them. I'm not talking about, like criminal law or family law where it's that side of critical for them. But many of these entrepreneurs that are getting the loans from the banks, this is their entire lives. This is their livelihood. So the moment that you take your eye off of that and forget that this is probably one of the most important parts, at least of their professional lives, that's when you go south. So how do you talk to them? How do you organize the file for them? How do you communicate with them to get what they're wanting done quickly, but in a way that fully protects your client, or client being the bank? That takes a lot of soft skills, a lot of communication, responsiveness, and making sure that you're not holding their hand necessarily, but driving them forward to accomplish what they're trying to do.
Yeah, as a son of a small business owner, I know very much the not the struggle, but the importance, the criticalness of making sure these sorts of deals get through. Because like you said, there's people's livelihoods on the line. There's so much on the line that is of utter importance to them. And to treat it as utterly important just for yourself is very fascinating to hear. And I'm also just as fascinated, profoundly fascinated, I would have to say. I don't know why, but in sort of the systems that work, that getting from A to Z, there's so much in between. There's so much of those meat and potatoes that you got to get into. There's a bit of a perverse example, but I worked at ShopRite for a good year of my life. And one of the things that always fascinated me, I worked in the produce department, and every morning the shipments come in, and you got to organize them. You got to make sure everything gets off the sort of everything that's delivered. Make sure everything goes in. But on that one day where someone forgets or someone doesn't, then you're getting more stuff in, and there's a backload. And I was just so fascinated by the fact that every moving part has to be absolutely perfect in order to get to that end that needs to be met. And just as you do, and just as ShopRite does to make sure that all their produce is out and fresh and beautiful, just like I did for a year of my life. I'm always fascinated by that, always fascinated by the systems, and I love to see that it transfers to pretty much every industry out there in the world. It's a wonderful thing. But you started as a summer associate, as you said, at Lewis Kappes, and you met a lot of mentors. And I have to ask from this, how important has mentorship been for you in your career?
Oh, it's super important. I think every attorney is going to agree with me on that mentorship is probably one of the most important parts about choosing an employer, or choosing an area of law, or just life in general, right? So there's all different types of mentors. When I mentioned mentors earlier, I'm talking about in-firm mentors, right? So one of my mentors is still here, and he was the founder of our practice group, and he's the one that kind of put those systems and processes in place that you mentioned before. So having somebody to go to and say, okay, you've been doing this for 25, 30 years, and you've built this, you've seen everything. How do I insert myself to understand these and also take it to the next level? Okay. And he took me under his wing and kind of taught me everything that he knows from a substance standpoint. Taught me the history of what, SBA loan closings look like, and introduced me to clients, all of those things. Without him, I couldn't be doing what I'm doing today. So professionally, he taught me all of those things. But personally and on a leadership side, he also taught me a lot as well. So how to be, an effective attorney, not by the dollars and cents perspective, but also by leading by example, how to handle we're a mid-sized firm, a larger firm-ish, dealing with a lot of personalities, figuring out how to get everybody rowing in the right direction, and really have success from that front as well. Outside of the firm, though, I tell people all the time, you can have mentors, whether formal or informal within your firm, but if you don't have people outside of your firm, you're really missing the ball a little bit. And that could be, personal mentors, for family stuff, right? Other fathers or mothers or what have you that you look up to, faith leaders, leadership leaders, right? How to lead by example, all of those certain things. And I found that a lot of my mentors have actually come from online. So when I saw that you were doing this, and I saw a lot of familiar faces in your interviews, I'm like, man, those are the people that I actually view as mentors too, or mentees. You're building a network of mentors that you might not know it, or maybe you do right now, but it's unbelievable. You're going to look back in 5 years and say, man, I was a genius.
Oh my goodness, oh my goodness. That's high praise. Genius is a strong word, Scott. It's a very strong word. I wouldn't say I'm a genius by any measure, but fortunately my grandfather was very smart. So maybe I got a little bit of that.
Something came true.
I got a little bit of that. He's very extremely intelligent man, knows finances very well, and has had his estate done for about 15 years now. So he's ready to go. But I always appreciate the kind words. And going further from that, you were an associate from 2016 to 2020 after being a summer associate, and you're now a partner. Congratulations on that.
Thank you, sir.
I know it's been 3 years, but I always like to give the congratulations. I know I'm late to the party, but I hope I showed up just before it ended. And so I heard you talking about being a leader, the importance of that. What are some important aspects or tips you may have for people, and for myself, I'm very interested, on what are some great leadership qualities to have and to be in that position, to be able to make sure that people are rowing in the right direction? What are some tips you have for people and myself, to be a great leader?
Well, I think one of them, I know I keep saying cheesy and cliche and all those sort of things. Like, cliches are cliches because they're true, right? So I'm going to use one again, and it's treat people the way you want to be treated. But that doesn't stop with other attorneys. Our group is very benefited by all of our paralegals, closing specialists, post-closing, staff members who aren't attorneys. And leadership sometimes is not just focusing on the people who you're working with directly who might have a license, but figuring out, what are the pressure points with the staff? What can we do to make sure that they're enjoying what they do and sharing in the group vision? And so that's the second point, the vision side of things. So it's, what are we doing today? Yeah, it's a grind. It's still a job, right? You can love what you do and still say it's a grind. And sometimes it is, and sometimes things get stressful, but what are we working towards? And you said rowing in the same direction. What are we rowing towards? So what does this thing that we're building look like in 2 years? What does it look like in 5 years? What does it look like in 10 years? It's that long-term vision. And if you can get people to share in that vision, to also have those same goals, and making sure that those are positive goals, right? Not just self-beneficial goals, you're going to have a much better time, and you'll get buy-in. And you'll get people to say, look, that is actually pretty cool. And if things do get tough, which they will, I can stomach that a little bit more because I know what's on the horizon and I want that.
Well, that's absolutely poetically and beautifully said. I know cliches are cheesy, but I love myself some cliches. I have many cliches above me on my post-it notes. One of my favorite cliches, I have to say, is a drop of honey catches more flies than a gallon of gall. Abraham Lincoln said that. It's such a beautiful quote,
Yeah.
and I had to write it down and post-it note that because I was like, damn, that's so true. But it's sort of going off that as well. I think having the correct vision and having the right vision, be able to buy in is so important. It's very exemplifying of someone like Steve Jobs, who I absolutely love. And he always spoke about how important the vision was, how important to let people know where we are going, where we want to be. So it's very clear. There's no gray area. There's no, everyone feels purposeful in what they do every day. And that's very, very important leadership quality to have, something I will now instill in my life, that I've learned it here live on the Lawyers in the Making podcast. Scott Oliver giving us his leadership qualities. Because I aspire to do that one day myself. I aspire to be like you, Scott. I swear on my life, I aspire. But we talked about entrepreneurship beforehand, before the podcast, and you said it was your bread and butter. So what are some things that you've seen from entrepreneurs of small businesses, some qualities that they have is really important in making sure that they get the sufficient amount of loans and what they need. But just as a person as well, meeting these people, what are some great qualities that you've seen in some entrepreneurs where it's like, wow, like that's a guy I would want to give a loan to?
I think it's somebody who's all in, who's hyper focused, right? We see thousands of deals a year, and I get to know some of the borrowers throughout the closing process. And the best ones are those who are not necessarily, passionate about being a plumber or an HVAC owner or something like that. They understand that it's a job, right? But they understand that what they're buying, if they're buying a business, is not just that job, but it's everything, right? It's the people, it's the employees, from top to bottom. It's the customers. It's the understanding of what it means to be that person within that smaller community. Those people who understand that, the ones that have that fire and drive for that purpose, are the ones that are going to be successful. And I don't want to beat the dead horse, but a lot of the people in those situations also have the soft skills. So these types of people are obsessive almost about what they're trying to do. So if they're trying to close a loan and one of our clients says, hey, here's a checklist with 80 items that you have to turn in, the borrower that takes that and says, okay, you told me 80 items I need to turn in and we'll close in this many days. All right. By day 2, they've turned everything in and they say, here it is. It's organized. I want this because this is my livelihood. I appreciate what you guys are doing. Tell me how to get to the closing table. That type of borrower, worth their weight in gold. Worth their weight in gold.
Well, you keep mentioning soft skills, and can you further describe what sort of soft skills mean, and also some great aspects of soft skills to have as a person?
Mm-hmm. I'll start with the lawyer's perspective. So I think practice is critical to have those types of soft skills because it's treating every client like they're the only client and not just, big behemoth client at a certain amount of time. So it's responding to them, being responsive so that if they have a problem, you don't just put it off for 2 weeks, then respond and say, oh, hey, I'm going to get to this. It's no, you respond almost obsessively. I used that word earlier. A really good lawyer is obsessively responsive, just to say, hey, I got it. Here is the expectations. Here's what I'll give you. And then following through with that promise that you made. That's a soft skill in and of itself that I see all the time on deals, not being present with lawyers who are otherwise incredibly impressive. I'll see lawyers who are at, big name law firm out in New York, and they're representing a buyer on the deal, and I'm seeing their interactions with the buyer the entire time, and it's less than impressive. They might be giving really good quality work, but the service is lacking. So service, we're in a service industry. If you're in a service industry and you can't provide service, which is a soft skill, you're doing yourself and your clients a big, big disservice.
That's so super duper important for people to hear that service has to be of the highest and top echelon, and how important and integral it is to any business you begin, either that be a law firm or a small business or a startup company, whatever it may be. But you also were an adjunct professor at Indiana University, Robert H. McKinney School of Law. So I have to ask, would I want to be one of your students? And what's the sort of teaching style you go into there?
I hope so. I've been doing that for about 6 years now. I absolutely love it, right? It is sort of a labor of love. It's not highly compensated or anything like that, but IU McKinney has this fantastic perspective where they bring in a good number of adjunct professors. So somebody who practices full time, but then comes in and shares some sort of skill with students using a practical edge, right? So that's what I do. And I actually teach legal communication and analysis, which makes sense from my background. But I have a small class of usually around 15 students where we do legal writing, we do oral advocacy, but I also like to sprinkle in a lot of I won't call them soft skills, but practical skills that I see in practice that I think is lacking in law schools. So I follow the curriculum to a T. But if students want to do a little more, I offer networking rounds. I offer different projects that are not graded, that are not part of the curriculum, where they can go out and they can meet with attorneys, or they can learn how to write on social media, or they can figure out how to not only do those substantive appellate briefs or trial briefs or office memorandums, but hey, in practice, you might write these, but more often you're writing an email. So I'll do practices where you take 15 pages of information and then send 15 pages of information to Nate and say, hey, here's this in plain English, because that's what your clients are actually going to be wanting most of the time. So I hope you like to take the class. I try to take a practical approach to it, a practice ready approach, and I try to make sure that all of my students, either former or current, know that if they need a lifeline for a job, if they need a lifeline for just general life or law school advice, it's open, not just during that year, but well into the future. And now, since I've been doing it for 6 years, I see students on the other side of deals. I see students, rising up in the ranks, and some are even starting to become partners at law firms. It's so cool to see that and to say, hey, I remember you when you were a first year student and had no clue what you were doing and were so scared. Now look at you, you're kind of running your own thing. It's fun.
Scott, I have to say, I'm sold. I'm signing up for the class next semester. I will
Sounds
be
good.
I will be in the classroom getting that practical practice and being able to do those things. I think something you said, which was fascinating, is that you make them condense these 15 pages into an email and translate it into regular English. I think that's an amazing thing you're doing. And I'm fascinated by it. And I have to say, because it's such an important part to be able to give to your client what needs to happen and not speaking in legalese, but rather regular English and getting it in a straightforward way where, okay, here are the terms, here are what you need to know, and I will do my job and you just have to do your part. Oh, it's such a wonderful thing. But from that, I have to ask you love your entrepreneurship, as we were saying before. What are your favorite aspects of entrepreneurship, and what have you sort of learned about sort of, I guess it's not an industry, but what you've learned about it so far in being in your position, being the co-chair of the SBA loans? What's been some great takeaways?
I think the biggest takeaway is that there are people who are doing great things that aren't at Google and IBM and all of these big companies that you hear about in the news. Like the amount of borrowers that I have seen, put their backs against the wall and say, "I'm doing this. I'm signing a personal guarantee." We could get into details on that, but it's very risky in some sense. But I'm going to do this because I believe in what I'm trying to get done, and then to see them do it, get across the finish line, get their funding, and then years later, I can see them and see what they're doing, and they're wildly successful. They've 10x their business, to use the 10x, not cliche, but common saying. They've 10x their business. They've hired tons of employees. They're doing great. Their families are doing great. That's just so fun to see, and that truly is entrepreneurship. It's figuring out how to take a risk, just taking that leap, knowing that there are possibilities that it could go wrong, but not caring, doing it and then winning. That's so fun to see. That's the borrower side of it. From the practice side of it, the practice of law, in my opinion, can be entrepreneurial in certain respects. And our firm and our department specifically is a good example of that, because we're a business too. People don't like to say that law firms are businesses, but they're wrong. Law firms are businesses. We have to scale. We have to hire good people. We have to figure out how to develop business while also practicing law. All of those things, that's exciting to me because it's building. And that I can do that every day of my life, and 100% enjoy it.
I have to ask from that, and sort of going back to what you said a little while ago. You spoke about the golden rule: treat others the way you want to be treated. And not unfortunately, but I'm a philosophy major, so I love my dose of philosophy. That's Immanuel Kant, the golden rule. He coined it himself back in the 1700s. And I think it's such a wonderful thing. And I always try to conceal my philosophy on this podcast, but it never fails to come out because I can't hold it in. I really can't hold it in. I have to talk about it. But what is sort of have been a main life philosophy for yourself in being able to grow, being able to build something you said? I love that word, by the way. being able to build your brand, being able to build personally as a human being, as well as the content that you make. How is that? What's the sort of philosophy you sort of deliver to yourself in order to meet the ends that you have to?
That's a good question. Man, you should have prepped me for this. I think it would kind of encompass everything that we've talked about here. And I'd say do good work with good people with good intentions. All right. So good is kind of your common theme there, right? So do work that you enjoy that's actually beneficial, because we could get into a whole topic there, but do something good for other people, do it with good people. So whoever you're hiring, hire good people, have good clients, do all of the right things there, and then just try to provide back. And that could be in your practice or teaching or home or whatever it is that you like to do. If you're, moving the needle forward, like you said this earlier, I think if you're putting something out into the universe that's good, it usually comes back to you. And I found that, I mean, good things don't always happen, but if you have good intentions, you're curious and you're going out there and putting it out into the world, it usually comes back in a positive way.
What comes around goes around. I absolutely believe that.
Cliche, love it.
See, it's cliche, but I think the cliches are beautiful things. They're little tiny bite-sized little words that just mean immensely across so many different things. And something I love, and going back to your talking about mentorship, people online of many of my mentors have been online. We were speaking before the podcast about Tim Ferriss, who's an absolute idol of mine. I love him so much. I love you, Tim. And another guy I love is Alex Hormozy, and he always talks about one of the things that have always stuck in my mind, something he said one time, another cliche, is that simple scales and fancy fails. So these cliches are very beautiful things. We don't need to get too complex. It's just you got to keep it simple. You got to keep it short, keep it beautiful. Just like condensing those 15 pages into five little bullet points. It's very important to be simple, be understanding. And I love that so much. But speaking, this has nothing to do with books, but now I want to talk about books. Official, right now on the Lawyers in the Making podcast, Scott Oliver, what are some book recommendations you have for people out there? It doesn't have to be about the law, but just some books you've ever read where you've taken away amazing lessons and just some of your favorites.
Okay. Another one I'd really have to think. So I am a big fan of Malcolm Gladwell. And it's been a while since I've read his books because it was really in high school when I got turned on to those. But Outliers was a really good one. I enjoyed that a lot. Here recently, I'm a little bit into like the self-help type podcast. It sounds like you are too, like Ferris and those types of guys. There's a guy, his name's Ed Milet. He has a book called The Power of One More, and a couple others that are really, really good for personal life advice that apply not only to practice, but being a good father, husband, whatever it might be. Those are the types of books that I've really kind of honed in on. I'm not a fiction fan. I'm more of a personal development, self-help kind of guy. In addition to something that's really, really nerdy, I like to read about M&A, mergers and acquisitions, SBA finance, things like that. Anything that when I'm reading it, I find it interesting and I know that somehow it's making me a better person, whether that's the personal development or it's just, new trends and acquisitions, what's going on the other side of the country or throughout the world. Those types of things help my practice and help me kind of be the go-to person for our clients and for people at the firm.
Yeah, I myself have been very much getting into the self-help books. I didn't exactly do that. I read a lot of philosophy books before I got into that, which are in themselves self-help books. In my opinion, I think they're wonderful things. I like Nietzsche. I read a lot of Nietzsche, but I also love Dostoevsky. He's amazing. The Brothers Karamazov is probably my big recommendation, even though it is fiction, but it's a wonderful book. It's beautiful writing. I love it so much. But Mindset by Carol Dweck, actually, Darl Champion sent it to me. He was very, very kind enough to send it to me. So I've been getting into that. I talked about before the podcast. I'm finishing up the 4 hour work week right now. So I'm very much just getting into the self-help stuff. And there's such amazing books. They give you such tangible and practical advice for your own life and for your business and whatever it may be. But speaking about Alex Hormozy, one of my favorites, and Tim Ferriss, this is the third to last question here, but what are the sorts of things that you consume, not food? What are the sorts of things that you consume on a daily basis, either that be through social media? I know you make a lot of LinkedIn content, so people on LinkedIn you have suggestions about, maybe Instagram, the X platform, YouTube, Reddit, whatever it may be. What are the sorts of things that are crossing the transom of Scott's mind on a daily basis?
Well, I'll start with the ones that the low-hanging fruit that you just said. I'm a big fan of social media, but social media used positively and strategically. Okay, so there was a time before I started using it more strategically where it can get nasty, right? It can get really toxic, especially I'm going to call it Twitter because I can't get used to X, but especially Twitter. LinkedIn's always been generally positive, but both LinkedIn and Twitter are really important for me and my practice, which sounds very strange, but we could have a whole podcast on that. But LinkedIn and Twitter, if you follow the right people and the right topics, I'm not a fan of scrolling, but if you do scroll and you kind of digest what other people are saying, you can read trends in the industry. You can read things that other law firms are doing that are working well or working poorly. And as I'm scrolling through that, I'm like, well, this is actually, this is free advice. It's this free mentorship in a way that I can just digest quickly and take with me. And if I find something, truly compelling, I'll usually follow up with a person and schedule a call like this, or just talk to them on the way home. I actually block off 30 minutes every single day on the drive home to talk with somebody new that I've met online. Whole different story. But if you curate your feeds, that stuff is incredibly positive for you, but it takes time and it takes a lot of intentionality, especially on Twitter, because there's a lot of false information out there. There's a lot of, political discourse. There's a lot of filth that you really don't want to get into. But once you have it dialed in and you keep it pretty clean, those types of social media outlets can be really, really beneficial, personally and professionally. Outside of that, I work a lot. I love working, which is really weird. So I don't have a lot of time to do the TV thing as much. But podcasts, I mentioned him before, his book. I listen to a lot of Ed Milet. I listen to the Thought Leadership Project by Jay Harrington. I don't know if you've interviewed him yet, but if you haven't, you definitely should. And I consume a lot of Substacks from people that you've actually had on your show, Alex Sue, Ellie Albright, all these types of people who are thought leaders in their industries. I like to see what they're doing, what they're writing about, and how they're viewing the current state of the practice of law and the future outlook of the practice of law down the road. Because they're innovators, they're really visionaries. That's what I like to do.
I never fail to miss a platform to mention. I forgot about Substack. I have my own Substack, Lawyers in the Making. Substack.com. I love saying that. I really do. But I think something you really said that was really important is curating your feed. I've actually done that. I've went in and I've really battened down the hatches, made sure I'm just getting the right information every time. Just like you said, sometimes you could get into some, as they say nowadays, some doom scrolling, where you're just scrolling endlessly for years on end. But I think in curating your feed, make sure you're getting the right people. Make sure I see Alex Hormozy and Tim Ferriss every time I open the app, as well as Justin Welsh, who I found as well, who has been extremely, extremely beneficial. But just like you said, the internet is such a beautiful thing. There's so much free information and free advice that people are just posting, and it's an amazing thing. I find it so, so fascinating, just like books. The amount of information that is out there is so immense, and but it's very digestible. People will do threads. It'll be like 4 or 5 different points that they're making, and that's it, and they're done. But just in those 4 or 5 threads are years of learning and years of experience. And I just find it such a fascinating thing, and I love it so much. And I thank God every day that the internet became a thing, for better or for worse. Obviously, it's a blessing and a curse at the end of the day, but you got to take the blessing part and leave the curse one behind. So you're always working. You love work, which is a wonderful thing as well. But you're always working. But Scott, what does an ideal Friday night and Sunday morning look for Scott?
Oh, you're going to make me sounding so boring right now. I like Fridays and Mondays, which is really weird. Mondays for a whole different reason, but but Fridays, it's usually actually a pretty busy time in the loan closing process. So the first start of the day into the afternoon is usually pretty busy, but as people start to log off, I like to, get ahead, as weird as that sounds, for the coming week, once I've done that, usually I leave the office every day around 4:30. Doesn't mean I stop working, but I leave the office at 4:30. So on a Friday, I go home and we usually have some sort of big dinner, and do something fun, with the little one. I have a 5-year-old daughter. So being able to, see her without thinking about what I have to do on Saturday is always great. So staying at home, watching some TV with her, playing some games, doing crafts, and waking up the next day and having some sort of outing with the family is really fun. But keeping it low key, we have lots of trips and plans and all that fun stuff. But sometimes a just quiet Friday night and Saturday morning is just what the doctor ordered.
I have once again late to the party, but congratulations on the daughter. I think
Thank
it's a
you.
wonderful thing. I aspire to have a family myself one day, so I always find it amazing. I always find it wonderful to have people on the podcast talk about their spouse and talk about their children and having a wonderful time with them. That's why I love that question because it brings out the human side of everyone, and it brings out at the end of the day that's what it's all about. It's all about our families, all about being grateful to have them on this earth. But I have to ask, what are the sorts of trips that you're making? I have to
Well, we just got back from Disney. That was a big trip.
ask.
7 days at the park. So that was a big one. But those are more vacations. If we're staying home, we live on a lake. We like to go down to the little, they call it a beach. It's an Indiana beach, so it's not really a beach. But having, lake days, going out on the pontoon, fishing, having fun, those types of things are the easy ones that you can do. Trip wise, we drive everywhere. So that's partly not by choice. My wife doesn't like to fly, but we'll drive cross country, usually down to Florida or off on the east and west coast, just for a week, whenever we can, just to get things done and have a good time. But the flexibility of work has really benefited us in that respect because it's easy to be able to work remotely sometimes. And that doesn't mean completely shutting off for an entire week. That's really hard to do when you're managing a practice group and things. You're able to still be there without being there, but you're also able to spend time with the family and do the types of things that most people say lawyers can't do. At least in our firm and in our practice group, like family is first, and that's one of those little posters that everybody puts up, but it truly is true. We work hard, but the moment that you start neglecting your family, you're working too hard. And we need to figure something out to make you more efficient, to bring in help, to figure out how to balance this out, so that you're getting what's most important in your life, but also being able to focus fully and to be fully present at work too.
Well, Scott, I have to say, it seems like you're doing the balancing act that on a wonderful level, on a beautiful level, on the highest level. It is a wonderful thing to hear that something that your firm prides is putting that family first, making sure everyone is connected, everyone is being productive as well. But I have to ask from that, I have to ask, how important has achieving that autonomy and being able to do as you wish has been important to you? And what are some advice to people you have out there for people that are looking to achieve that kind of autonomy in their life?
I think it's incredibly important. It's harder as like a first or second year associate, but again, I keep touting my own firm, like that makes sense. But our firm is really good at that, and it's one of the reasons that I chose to work here over other places, is because a first, a second, a third year is very autonomous. To the extent that they get ownership in what they're doing, they get to have client contact, they get to work on interesting matters and lead deals as an associate, whereas other places, that's really not the case. You might be doing doc review or citation check, and all those things are very, very valuable, but that wasn't for me. I consider myself an entrepreneur in a way, and I can't go somewhere where somebody tells me what to do every second of every day and micromanages me. I don't like that. Some people love it. That's not what we do here. And anybody who works here will tell you the exact same thing. You love it or you hate it, but you get it early and you get it often, and that allows you to grow individually, to grow your practice, to allow you the opportunity to thrive if you're going to take it. So to me, that ownership is everything with being autonomous, and you can get it pretty early if you're the right personality type.
Yeah, that's amazing advice, and I hope to call myself an entrepreneur one day. And just like you said, though, having that freedom to grow yourself, to grow what you're doing, and also being as productive as humanly possible. I think the not micromanage. Now, I know nothing about this, but having the ability to have not people not micromanage you all the time gives you the immense amount of productivity that is available and that is tangible and can be reached. I think it's just such an important thing to say. But Scott, last question here. I do this at the end of every episode. What are your words of wisdom for the aspiring law students, the current law students, and even the legal professionals out there in the world?
Oh man. I think it would be to stay curious about whatever it is that you're wanting to do. So for somebody who's entering law school, just remember the amount of opportunities that are out there. You can listen to me talk all day about, being a closing attorney, SBA lending, Lewis Kappes, all of those sort of things. But the truth is that's not a fit for some people, and that's totally okay. So when you go to these law schools and they tell you, hey, it's big law or nothing, that's absolutely not true. You can be a private law lawyer at a firm of any size. You can go into tech, you can go into business, you can do your own thing, consulting, anything that you want with a legal degree can be achieved, but you have to put the puzzle pieces together. Most law schools aren't going to do that or foster that for you. They're going to say that there are a couple different paths that you can choose, and that's it. Get out there and meet people, be curious, and say, what did you do? Well, look, I'm describing you right now, Nate. I'm describing you. Get out there and ask people, hey, what are you doing? How did you get to where you're at? You're doing that right now with all these people, and you're saying, oh, well, I could be a private law lawyer. That sounds pretty cool. Oh, I could also go off and do this type of venture. That's really cool too. Once you find those opportunities and you're curious about them, really drill in hard and figure out how did they get where they are now and how can I sketch that out for my life and then just follow that path. I think it's really important to keep that open mind.
Well, Scott, that was beautifully and elegantly said, and it further exemplifies what I try to do here to show to everyone that there is no one straight path to law school and the law, and that there's so many unique paths that people can take. You just got to go out and find them, you got to try them. But Scott, that's the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on, sharing your wisdom, sharing your experiences. And for everyone out there listening, check us out, lawyersinthemaking.substack.com, and I will see you in the next one.